Hello, everybody, and welcome to my brand new post. I think. Thank you all for subscribing. Thank you all for watching. Can I also just first of all say I have another page called AEA Films UK, which is my film production company. On there, you can see all my projects, like my documentary, my two-part documentary called Dahomey and Vodun, which has two 35-minute documentaries, one on the Dahomey Kingdom, which is in modern-day Benin. Make sure you go and watch that and like it. And the second part, which is called Voodoo in Togo, which is I basically go to Togo and try to find out as much as I can about voodoo. And these are full-length documentaries, two-part documentaries are screened at film festivals around the world. So please check it out. Also, I just released a new trailer a few weeks ago for my next film called A Thousand Years to Timbuktu, which is basically my journey from Bamako to Timbuktu. So please make sure you go there, make sure you like the video, watch it. The trailer's 2 minutes long, so just watch it, and the documentary will follow on that channel soon. But on this channel, what I like to do with this particular channel is just be a little bit more personal, and tell you some things that are on my mind as and when they happen. Like for example, Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe passed away. I think it was on Friday or Saturday, or was it Friday or Thursday? Thursday or Friday anyway. He passed away, and I live in England at the moment, and to be fair, I don't watch the news, but what I saw online on YouTube, the previous pieces that they did on him were not as biased as I thought. I thought they'd go straight for, he's a white, he wants all the whites out, he's a dictator, all the things that he's got the Hitler mustache, all the bullshit that they've put out over the last couple of 2 decades actually about the man. I thought they would do it, but to be fair, it's not been that biased. But then the question kept coming up from different people that I'll be speaking to about what's his legacy going to be. And I'm like, okay, I think it's because we're in the moment now. We forget just how important this guy is. Now, I'm considered a millennial because I was born a couple of years after 1980. So because I'm in my mid-30s now, but that means I'm a millennial. I'm a millennial, but I still understand what it was like to grow up in the 90s and know that South Africa is a place which is off limits, it's racist. I knew enough about the apartheid system to know that that's a place where that region, Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, Namibia, is a place that black people really don't get treated with respect. And my father, worked very hard for the African Union, then called the OAU, to try and help, at least help Mandela be released and removal of apartheid. So we forget. But the thing with Mugabe is, and I want to just start out by saying that Robert Mugabe will be regarded in history. It may not be today, but as time goes by, our future generations will regard this man in the same way that they did Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Toure, and many other figures of the Pan-African struggle. And why do I say this? Very simple. At the time of Kwame Nkrumah came to power really, he was Garveyite to an extent, listened to a lot of radical black speakers in the United States when he studied there, but also as an African knew that the oppression of his people was wrong, and he saw the globality of this thing. He saw that how blacks were treated all around the world, and knew that unification was so important, but also saying no to Europe, saying no to America was crucial, to say no as a bloc. So when he came out and did things, I have no question, I have no doubt in my mind that he ruffled a few feathers, in the political atmosphere of Gold Coast or Ghana. It was once when it was called the Gold Coast. There are people who were part of the establishment who didn't want him and who knew that having him in power will mean that their pockets will be a little bit lighter. Then you have that Monrovia and Casablanca group, or whatever it's called, where the different factions from the OAU. And I know for a fact that it probably was the case for him in Ghana too. People didn't want him, and no doubt people collaborated to have him removed. He comes to power technically 1956. By 1966, he's out. Sekou Toure, same thing. Sekou Toure said no to France, said no to La France Afrique, and was fighting enemies like France, as well as the neighbors who had lackeys. The Houphouët-Boigny's of Ivory Coast, and to an extent maybe Senghor and people like that, all around him in West Africa, who wanted this French bloc. And these people, no doubt, made life difficult for him. Look at how Guinea is now. The fact that Paul Pogba lives in France and claims French nationality is a byproduct of Sekou Toure saying no and what France went and did. Now, Sekou Toure, I know I made a movie which touched a little bit on Amilcar Cabral a few years ago. And, in my research, there's a lot of rumors about Sekou Toure being involved in the murder of Amilcar Cabral. I don't really think it's real. But even regardless of any of those rumors which keep coming up, this man is still regarded as a giant in the Pan-African story when we talk about Africans being united. Okay? These are just, stories and rumors will always come up. And reason why I bring up those two people is because Robert Mugabe, same thing. In my opinion, he stayed in power a little bit too long. I understand maybe why he did it, and I have no doubt that there are people within his system, within his country, who don't like what he did, who don't like, who I know he wronged them. I mean, there's no question that, nobody's a saint here. He's wronged a few people, I'm sure of it. But we cannot ignore the fact that his agenda from the get-go, since 1979 when they were signing the document, from Rhodesia to move to Zimbabwe, the one man or one person, one vote. I have no idea that he was on the target list for a lot of people. The white power structure in Zimbabwe, just like the white power structure in South Africa, wanted to maintain all the control they possibly could. And a man saying, fuck you, a man saying, some of the things that he was saying, this man was very outspoken about the Europeans. And let's not forget, earlier on, he was a little bit more conservative and as he grew older, he got a little bit more open. But Zimbabwe going from the breadbasket, as they call it, a place which was self-sufficient, to a place where people are not as sufficient, is a byproduct of one thing. It's not because of a man who was strong about being an African. It's white people not accepting that these people want to take back control of the land that we stole from them. Cecil Rhodes, 110, 20 years earlier than that, went in, really conned people, in organized troops and organized soldiers in order to come and force people to take land from them. Fine, okay, you call it conquest. But then don't go and then try and say that, okay, a small section of this country should control 85% of it. 7% controlling 85%, whatever the case may be at the time in Zimbabwe. To now, where Zimbabweans own everything, pretty much to a larger extent than South Africa, definitely. But right now we have a time when people are basically running their own affairs. Now, fine, there's been an embargo similar to Cuba, where people haven't been able to get as much. They've put a blockade. They've made, Mugabe, yes, he's made some bad decisions, but, they've made, Tony Blair and the like have made it very difficult for this guy to be able to run the country in a functional way. Now, granted, he stayed a little bit too long. He did a few things that most people in power would do when they get greedy. I am not knocking the man. But again, like Sekou Toure, to an extent like Kwame Nkrumah, these are men that may have hung on a little bit longer, not necessarily a little bit longer, but let me be careful the way I word this. I'm not going to say that they weren't democratically elected, but we all know that they didn't necessarily give other people a chance, and they were both ousted in coups. Now, Mugabe was removed in a coup, probably by a collaborator. I think they said he was going to name his wife as the number 2. I mean, all of these things, whatever the reason for it was, he was removed. And, his time had gone, and there wasn't necessarily any advancement. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes down to what he stood for, when you name him as a figure, when you name the giants of Africa in the anti-colonial struggle, the people who were outspoken about what they believed in for African people and what we deserved and what we should have done, you have to name him. You have to. And I think, without a shadow of a doubt, people like it's so ironic now, because the world, regardless of what you consider the situation in South Africa, they regard Nelson Mandela as a great human being. But Nelson Mandela came into power from prison, really with the collaboration and the propelling by the whites. No man comes out of prison without some type of plan and structure behind to ensure that the economies of that nation are maintained. The power structure can't put you in power so that you could take their power from them. It's not possible. And I think if Nelson Mandela had done what Robert Mugabe did, without a shadow of a doubt, he would have probably been killed, or he probably just wouldn't have been in power ever. So in a way, you have to look at what's the situation in South Africa right now with the xenophobic attacks. By the way, this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. There's a lot more blood to be shed there, simply because they've never dealt with the apartheid injustices. They've never actually addressed the systematic, the structure of the country. Blacks are still very much at the bottom. Whites are still very much at the top, controlling everything, right? Yes, there might be the few tokenistic entrepreneurs and CEOs that are made to run companies, but the DSTV we're watching in Nigeria, it's still run by the whites. The farmlands, the diamonds, and all the processing that goes on in that country is still gate kept by the whites. And this is why there is still a lot more blood to be shed. The xenophobic attacks are probably just a distraction. There's going to be you have small communities that are being built in different parts of South Africa, at least from what I've been informed. Don't quote me on this, where people are saying, we're building white communities, we're arming ourselves, we're defending ourselves. I mean, you're defending yourself because you know that the wealth you have it's unfair. You shouldn't have that much wealth, and you feel that there's a sense of order that needs to be restored, and they know about it. We're the only ones who seem to be taking our frustrations at our neighbors. So South Africa is not an example. South Africa is probably the example of what would have happened if Mugabe hadn't been who he is, and kicking out the farm owners, and no matter how many documentaries and films and special interest stories they make about these white farmers being unsettled and being kicked out, they never call them refugees. They just say, oh, these people were farm owners, Rhodesians. Some of them still call themselves Rhodesians. The arrogance of these people. So you have to really look at what Robert Mugabe did. This man said, I'm going to take back whatever we own. He ruled with impunity to an extent. He probably beats up, killed maybe a few people. I don't know what the situation is. But in a war like this, it's very, 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 very difficult to just, and I have to be very careful the way I word this, because death is not the loss of life is not good at all. And I'm sure people have lost life. Question is, are you going to lose life anyway in a struggle which you are on the wrong side of history? Or are you going to lose life when you're on the right side, I guess, and if by the way, I'm not speaking of any specific incident. I'm just saying that I'm sure that in circumstances like this, people will suffer, people will be incarcerated, people will be jailed, people will be beaten up, and so on. I'm sure things like that have happened. But rather than dwelling on that, because again, going back to Nkrumah, going back to Sekou Toure had enemies. What did he do with those enemies? But when we talk about Sekou Toure in history, what do we say? And conversely, when we talk about different leaders all around the world who are considered great, I mean, let's not even go into the Europeans, but just when we talk about even leaders in all across Africa, Patrice Lumumba, I'm sure, had enemies. Whether he did something about them or not, we won't know. Paul Kagame is one of the most polarizing figures in Africa, period. But those who are for him believe in what he is trying to do and can see the results, and those who are against him focus on incidents like what I just mentioned. So we have to be very, very careful when we talk about history. History can never ever paint a human being as good or bad. There's a nuance between the two. I'm talking about whether or not somebody can regard it as a giant of the story of Africa, the collective story of Africa. You shouldn't disregard him for those incidents when we don't know whether the others committed the same incidents. I would certainly say he is a giant. He's a breath of fresh air in that southern region of Africa. He will be missed, and we may see Zimbabwe turn like the rest of Africa, particularly West Africa, even the so-called English-speaking parts of West Africa, where we have functioning economies that look black on the surface, but all the cash that's being generated is sent abroad, whether it's through the banks of the corrupt politicians or to the multinational corporations who are pretty much investing, shadow investing, invincible angel investors in these places. So we may see that happen in Zimbabwe. But one thing is for sure, when you write the story of Zimbabwe, even the choice of naming it after a kingdom like Great Zimbabwe, even the choice of removing the racist name of a human being who managed to do business and con people in order to take control of it. Just doing those acts mean that you have to acknowledge him in the history of Zimbabwe and the greater history of Africa. So that's just what I wanted to say about that. I hope I wasn't too long. Hope to try and do a few more of these. Please make sure you like. Please make sure you go to AEA Films UK. That's my other channel. Or TFTM Productions. I'm not sure. It keeps popping up as different things. But one of those two, you'll see my documentary Dahomey and Vodun, Danhome, and symbol Vodun, Vodun. Just type that into YouTube, you're able to see it. And also, please make sure you like this channel too. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like the video, please. Just like the video. And leave a comment if you have something to say. Let me know what else you want me to talk about, and we can go from there. Thank you very much, my brothers and sisters, my sisters and brothers.